Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. You earn 3% daily cash back up front when you use it to buy a new iPhone 15, AirPods, or any products at Apple. And you can automatically grow your daily cash at 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, member FDIC. Terms apply.
In sports, the scoreboard doesn't tell the full story, but Netflix does. Stories about dads who happen to be world-class quarterbacks and a battle for the heart, soul, and direction of the multi-billion-dollar business of F1. Whether you're a diehard fan or you're brand new, Netflix has the stories for every type of fan. You can watch these incredible sports stories like Quarterback, F1 Drive to Survive, Untold, and many more now on Netflix.
Hello there and welcome to the 1865 Match Report. We're recording on the evening of Sunday the 12th of November when Forest have just lost 3-2 away to West Ham. It was a bit of a roller coaster match. Forest conceded a goal really early on to Lucas Paquetá. Then they managed to equalise just before half-time and then took the lead midway through the second half, which lasted all of about a minute before they let West Ham equalise through Jared Bowen. And then, as you'll probably be aware, Thomas Souček got a very late winner. So it definitely feels like points dropped. In a second, I'll be joined by George to discuss the match. But first of all, let's just run through the Forest team news. And essentially, it's as you were. So after an impressive victory against Villa last week, we had Odysseus in goal, a back four of Aina and Toffolo at fullback, with Niakate and Murillo in centre-half. In the midfield, we had Aurel Mangala, who was holding, alongside Ibrahim Sangare and Nico Dominguez. And then Taiwo Awoniyi was supported by Morgan Gibbs-White on the right and Antony Elanga on the left. So, George, as I said, a little bit of a roller coaster. You must feel gutted that you went all the way there and you didn't even see Forest get a point.
Yes, I know. It's progress that we've scored a couple of goals away from home, because I know we've not done that since the Chelsea game, wasn't it? But it does ultimately feel very disappointing. I think going into the game, many Forest fans would have taken a point out of this. We've probably exceeded expectations from at this time of the season. I think many fans take it as blocks of 4 between the international break. So obviously from Luton, Liverpool, Villa in this game, I think we'd have taken 4 points. So we already had that coming into the game. I think many of us would have taken a point. And I think really Forest went there to take a point. It was a very even game. And in the end, I think it was, we'll come on to it, obviously, but it was self-inflicted, the fact that Forest lost the game because they just couldn't manage the game, sat back and invited West Ham onto it. And when you've got someone like James Ward-Prowse whipping in balls that are always to the money, then you're going to concede goals like that. You know, you can defend set pieces all you want, but it's not every week you come up against James Ward-Prowse, and Forest had to do much better by minimising the chances that he had to swing the ball, and then ultimately that's what cost them.
Yeah, no, it's difficult to disagree with that. And going back to the earlier point you made, when we recorded our Forest Ramble discussion pod, about 4 matches ago, in fact, in the last international break, I did ask everyone to come up with predictions for the amount of points that you thought we'd get during the next block. And I think you predicted 5 points, if I remember rightly. Adam had predicted just 3. So we're somewhere in between that. But yeah, still, it feels a little bit hard to take, bearing in mind we've had the Luton match and today in there. You mentioned about set pieces and James Ward-Prowse, and we'll definitely come on to that a little bit later on. But Forest started as badly as you could wish because, again, you know, every single goal was utterly avoidable, and that was really illustrated by Nico Dominguez, who's been so impressive since he's been playing for us, and he just. It's only what I can only describe as a brain fart, wasn't he? It should have been a simple pass out to the right fullback, but he managed to hit it against Ibrahim Sangare's arse, and that set up the West Ham player who's got the best shot with a free shot at goal from 20 yards, didn't it?
Yeah, and he took it clinically into the bottom corner, and there's nothing the goalkeeper can do about that. But Dominguez, you know, it's a naive pass, isn't it? He's sort of half looking. I think he's just looking to offload it, in all honesty. And Sangare, I mean, he's not even looking at it at all. And it was frustrating because as the game went on, it was such an even half. I mean, the first half was one of the most even first halves that you're going to see. Both teams with pretty much the same tactics, which was pack the midfield, make teams go out wide. And I think particularly West Ham, they had Bowen up front and they didn't utilise the wide areas, I thought, with Bowen up front. I think they could have done that. And in the end, I know Antony came on quite late, but I thought they looked better with Bowen on the right. But realistically, the only time that West Ham got through Forest midfield was via that mistake. Apart from that, in the first half, they stuck to the plan and kept them out. And ultimately, considering that early goal did take a huge swing in their favour. I think from that point, West Ham, they could sort of play a lot differently. They didn't have to maybe take as many risks as they might if they were trying to get the lead. And it left Forest a bit frustrated. So it took them, obviously, to score the goal till nearly half time. But really, throughout the first half, there was nothing to split them. And, I think it's not surprising that a goal came from a mistake because it looked like two very well-drilled sides early on.
Yeah, and I mean, it's difficult to disagree with that. I mean, also, I would also say that maybe the period between 15 minutes and 45 probably didn't match the first 15 minutes of spectacle. It seemed to be, quite... Those first 15 minutes, there's quite a lot going on. And we should point out that after about, I think, 13 minutes, Forest had probably their... Ironic, bearing in mind they actually scored later on, but they had their best chance of the half when some nice play down the left-hand side led to Toff putting in an absolute peach of a cross. Oh, I really loved the way he wrapped his foot around it. Taiwo got his head to it and really got a lot of power. And it brought what I think is possibly the save of the season from Alphonse Areola in the West Ham goal, clawing it when it looked like it was in, all ends up, didn't it?
It did, yeah. And it actually came from the other side, from Gibbs White getting down the right. And that's where Forest just had to get crosses in from the right because they couldn't get through the middle. Like I said, his cross missed everyone, comes to Elanga, and Forest recycle it well. Excellent ball in from Toffolo, like you said. And Awoniyi got up so high. And from how far away you are in the away end, I was in the upper tier. I wasn't as quite far back. I was only about 5 or 6 rows in, which I think was the perfect view. But it was in slow motion. You can't really see it. But I honestly thought that was in. And it was an immaculate save from Areola. I think it almost nearly went past him and he had to claw it, like you say, back into play. And then Forest nearly got the rebound and couldn't get it. But yeah,
So the ball came to Sangare, who tried to flick it back to Awoniyi, who was kind of more or less in the same spot towards the edge of the 6-yard box. But there were a lot of bodies in the box. It didn't quite work out. And then, of course, to kind of once again cement that point about defensive mishaps, we let West Ham break on us just a minute or two later, and the ball was played through to Paquetá. And this time he just had a second of hesitation before he pulled the trigger, which enabled Murillo to get back, which meant that he was able to put Paquetá off enough that it was just a powder puff shot, which Vlachodimos was able. It was an easy save. You wouldn't even call it a save, would you? Just gathered it up. But it looked a bit hairy at that moment, didn't it?
It did, yeah. And I think that was a situation that both teams were trying to avoid because I think coming into the game, I looked at the stats and Forest averaged 38% possession this season and West Ham averaged 40%. So it's clear that both sides look far better on the break. And I think clearly Forest do and West Ham do as well. So I think both teams were trying to minimise that threat. And there wasn't that many counter-attacks because both teams were set up to avoid that. So when that happened, it was lucky that Paquetá had some hesitation and Murillo obviously got the other side of him, put him off, and a good save from Vlachodimos, however you choose to say it. But
apparently it's pronounced to rhyme with Chakadimus, so Vlachodimos. Okay. Sorry, Vlachodimos. Anyway, we'll call him Odysseus. And of course, that came at a little bit of cost to Murillo, who kind of lay down on the ground for a little while. He had a bit of treatment. It looked like his hammy had gone, but he kept playing for quite a long while after that. And we'll come back to that a little bit later on. I was at home watching it with my wife, and we were commenting that first half was really cat and mouse, wasn't it? Going back to that point you made about both teams almost preferred to play on the break, and it made it a little bit more kind of tentative, and as a spectacle it looked like two teams who felt that they had something to lose rather than two teams who wanted to go out there and win it.
Yeah, I think what Forest were missing actually, and I've always thought this, is Gibbs White on the wing. I think they miss him in that central area so much, and there was a few times where he did a few flicks and couldn't get hold of the ball, but I think that's more out of frustration because you saw West Ham, they had James Ward-Prowse in there who can just one touch, play it round the corner. And I think Forest lack that because we've got three fantastic players in midfield, and we've talked about them enough. But what they are clearly more defensive, and they lack that sort of cutting edge, like on the edge of the box to make one pass to cut it through. And Gibbs White was sort of trying to drift inside and do that role, but obviously there's no one on the wing. And we've always had that. I think under Cooper, we've always looked lopsided. When we had Johnson, we never had a left winger. And now we've got Elanga, we've never got a right winger. So I think ultimately the aim for Forest will be to try and get Gibbs White in that middle, because when he's got wingers either side of him, I remember there was a time he dropped in field, edge of the box, and he latches onto it, and there was a gap on the right channel where Johnson would have been, and it had been played in and probably clinically put it across into the bottom corner. But in the end, Gibbs White had to run into that area because he was sort of having two players roll. So I think that the stagnatory, is that not really a word, but you know what I'm saying, that Forest have going forward will be solved in the end by when Gibbs White is allowed to come inside. And I suppose Cooper's hand's been forced in that way with Hudson-Odoi being injured. We've not got that. That's probably the one place where we're short of depth. So Gibbs White is almost there, and he was in that position for the goal that we'll come on to. But in the end, I really do hope that Gibbs White can be moved back central, and it will give us a lot more balance.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we'll probably talk about during the international break when we record our discussion podcast. But let's just skip forwards to that, because you mentioned that actually the goal did come from Gibbs White running down that right-hand side channel, and it came from Ibrahim Sangare. Now, Cooper said quite a few weeks ago, it's like, we've signed him to play as a number 6, but while he's getting up to speed with the Premier League, he wants to keep playing Mangala as the number 6 and then giving Sangare a chance to kind of get acclimatized. But the moment here was a classic number 6 moment from Sangare, because he was on the halfway line. He robbed the ball off Kudus, and as all good number 6s do, he looked up and found a good opportunity to play the ball through. And Gibbs White was in that the Brennan Johnson channel, as he called it. And I thought he'd just maybe taken it a step too far, but he got a decent shot in. Areola parried it. And as all good number 9s should be, Taiwo was in the box on the spot. He'd managed to stay on side. And hey, presto, it was 1-1. How did that feel for you?
It was incredible. It was just what Forest deserved, I think, because even though they've probably not done so much to deserve to score a goal, they certainly didn't deserve to be behind. It was a very even game. And yeah, it was great celebration. I mean, everyone sort of almost paused because, Taiwo does surprise you with his, he just sort of stops, doesn't he? And I wonder maybe Gibbs White was offside. So it was a sort of half celebration, but no VAR check came, thankfully, for once. And yeah, it was a goal Forest really deserved. It would have been criminal, I think, for them to go in the break behind 1-0. And, Gibbs White showed a bit of pace. He was forced wide, like you say, but it's a brilliant work from Sangare as well, like you say. And it was, like I said, for Forest, the only time that Forest got through the middle of West Ham. And typical of that first half, it really doesn't surprise me that two very well-organised teams with a good plan, both goals have came from a mistake in midfield that the other side has pounced on. And Taiwo obviously making up for that header with the tap in. He had to reposition his feet quickly because it was sort of behind him. So he was able to wrap his foot around it and tap it in the net. But it was certainly a goal that Forest deserved, and goal that gave them some confidence going into the break and into the second half.
Yeah, so it was 1-1 at half time. Just a bit of a footnote to that, which was that Vladimir Coufal had been booked for, it is a classic kind of professional foul, I suppose, on Antony Elanga. And early on in the second half, we saw Elanga and Awoniyi. So there's a little spell early in the second half where every time that Odysseus was gathering the ball, he was looking to play it forward quickly. And this was some lovely, never mind a 1-2, it was a 1-2-3-4 as Taiwo and Elanga were progressing up the left-hand side. And you could tell that Coufal was scared because he'd already had that yellow card and he didn't really know how to deal with it. But then also Taiwo was pressing. So this 1-2-3-4, Taiwo got through on the left-hand channel and then he put it just wide. From your point of view in the ground, were you thinking that was going to be the goal?
It was so agonising, that miss, because the one person you'd want it to come to, it was Taiwo. And it was Forest. They didn't really threaten that much on the counters like in the first half, but in the second half, there was 3 or 4 times they got into that situation. And yeah, it's lovely. I think Awoniyi got it first, didn't he? Then played it into Elanga, then played it back. And it was a lovely bit of play from the pair of them. Like you say, Coufal was clueless, didn't know what to do. I think he got their man of the match in the end in the ground. I don't know who got it for Sky. but that was a bit, it flummoxed me a little bit. But yeah, Taiwo, I think he almost struggles when he's got too much time. When he's got to do an instinctive finish, that's where he's at his best. And often it can come off his shin or off his shoulder or something. But when he's got too much time, I think that's where sometimes he's, obviously he's a complete striker. He makes our attacks. But that's the one thing I'd have against him. I think, remember that goal he scored at Old Trafford where he had about 50 yards to think about it. And I don't think he ever actually shot. I think he just walked in. And then Onana didn't know what to do. And it was almost that situation. He had too much time. And in the end, from a position where I thought he had quite a lot of space and could have maybe taken another touch, he just snatched at it. And from my angle, it went very, very wide. And it was about 3 minutes into the half, wasn't it? And a goal late on in the first half, a goal early in the second half. It would have given Forest so much confidence. And it's a real shame because you'd have wanted Awoniyi on the end of it. And he ought to have taken that, in all honesty.
Yeah, and you just wonder, he's on his left foot or on his right and all that. And like you say, there is that thing about he's such an instinctive player. That's that whole thing that we've said so many times about who he looks a bit clumsy, but he gets stuff done. And that's something that I guess that's the bit that can't really be taught, isn't it? And, you want to kind of... And he's got better at it, but you'd expect a striker in the box to be able to finish with either foot and do better than dragging it wide there. But no matter, because about 15 minutes later, Forest did take the lead. And again, it was a really nice goal, wasn't it? Talk us through how you saw it.
Yeah, well, it was a game that I actually felt that one goal might nick it because of how close it was. And it was on the counter-attack again. It was Sangare laid it to the right-hand side, and Aina, who hadn't really got forward in the game. I think Aurier is often played as that more advanced role, but Aina, which I think rightly so in the Premier League, is a lot more defensive, and that's what he wanted to fall back. But it was a rare occasion that he got down the right-hand side, did a couple of nice step-overs and got into the box on the right-hand side. And then you're wondering, can he find the ball? Because a few times we got into that position on the left, and it was Elanga sending the ball in, and often it went into the keeper's arms or was deflected wide or something. So it was really good for Aina, sent it into a fabulous area, and there was 3 candidates to get the ball. I think Awoniyi was with his back to goal, he let it go. I'm sure Dominguez might have been in there as well. Someone else was in there, but it was Elanga that came onto it with his right foot, back post about maybe 10 yards out, and he just swept it lovely into the back where it came from, into the bottom right corner. Took his shirt off, took the little bra thing that the footballers wear off, and sent the Forest fans into delirium. Yeah, it was a brilliant moment. And like I say, in a game that was so tight, you thought, this might be the goal that nicks it. Let's try and sit behind this lead and get all 3 points. Obviously, it didn't turn out that way, but it was a fabulous moment and a really clinical finish from Elanga.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It didn't turn out that way, because although it was a really lovely goal, and fabulous work from from the fullback in the attacking positions, doing those little bits of skill, the perfect ball across into the kind of the danger zone, the corridor of uncertainty, and nicely finished. But unfortunately, Elanga, having looked very, frankly, fearsome, he's got quite the physique. But then he ended up putting his shirt back on and looking a bit silly, because Forest threw away the lead within 45 seconds of the restart. And it was a needlessly conceded corner, wasn't it?
Yeah, I can't remember actually what the corner was conceded for, but it set the tone for the rest of the game, actually, because once Forest conceded that, they seemed to just concede a set piece, a free kick, a corner every 5 minutes. And in the end, they're indefensible against Ward-Prowse. What was the corner given for?
Basically, it was a ball on the left-hand side, and it was just it was one of those where someone goes in to kind of block it / welly it, and rather than, there's a lack of composure involved in that. And they always say that the most dangerous time is when you've just scored a goal. And that was proven not only with the goal that we conceded, but with the concession of the corner in the first place.
Yeah.
And
another time that would be controlled and cleared. But at one, maybe if you just scored a goal, you think, we've just scored, we're just got the lead, we're not going to concede here. And in the end,
exactly.
You can't afford to think like that in that position.
And there's many sports psychologists who are paid a lot of money to kind of look into that kind of thing. But then, having said that, for the first goal, Paquetá is probably the player who's got the best kind of shot in the West Ham team. And then for this one, we give the best set piece taker in Premier League history a chance to put a free ball into the box, and then West Ham's best goal scorer a chance to be able to head it home. And it just looked it looked messy, didn't it? From where you were at, and without the benefit of replays and the fact that it's a long way away, but what were you thinking in terms of culpability? Were you blaming the goalkeeper? Were you blaming the defence? Were you just saying, you know what, it's a really good cross, and therefore sometimes we concede those? How were you feeling at the time?
Sort of the latter. I think Ward-Prowse's deliveries are very hard to deliver to defend. And Forest, I think in the first half, we only conceded one or two corners. So we'd not really had that exposure. But having just scored a goal and then suddenly we're back in our own box and defending. And I initially did think the keeper could have came to get it. I think he sort of ended up flapping and in no man's land. And his deliveries almost seem to go in the same area. They go very tight, very close to the goal mouth. And sometimes they don't hit the near man, but often it's into that area. And I think Forest probably got unlucky because Bowen's certainly not the tallest, and it was a great header, brilliant leap into the net. But the ball just comes in so fast. I mean, I personally, it left his route and then it was in the net. I couldn't see, I didn't know who scored it, only because Bowen was running away that I knew it was him. But yeah, it's a fabulous ball in, and you can't criticise Forest, I suppose, for conceding that, because you don't come up against that every week, and even in training, you can't do that. But I think the big difference in the end was shown by when Forest had a few corners towards the end of the game. Gibbs White could never find a man. He never put a ball in that Ward-Prowse did to threaten them. And I think that has been a criticism that we've had of him since he's came in, that he never really seems to find a man. And there's a man behind me saying, Forest haven't scored a corner since Spurs away last season, which I know they did score against United, which I did point out to him that he didn't really appreciate. But yeah, that was a stark difference between the two sides. So I suppose you can't really commend Forest for the defending of the corner, but you can be critical of the way they conceded the corner and then the way they kept conceding chances like that.
I beg to differ slightly. I think that it's that thing about having that when you're defending corners in the modern game, you need to have a mix of man marking and kind of blocking and defending areas. And in that case, I mean, Murillo was the defender who was probably closest. And like Bowen, he's one of those who's maybe not the tallest for someone playing in that position. Yeah. So I don't know. I can't, without kind of analysing it deeply, I cannot, point any fingers. But I would say that you've got to be looking, even if you're the attacking team, you're going, that's a great delivery and a great header home. As a defending team, I'm thinking it is a good delivery, but we know that he's got a good delivery. So firstly, don't concede the set piece. And then secondly, know that he is brilliant.
Where it's coming to.
You know that he will take the in-swinging corners, which will be very tight to the goal. And you also know that their best goal scorer is Jarrod Bowen, who's not actually that tall, so you should be able to do something about it. Yeah. So that's my take on it. If we spin forward a little bit, so it was still, in the pre-match preview I did with the We Are West Ham podcast, I said, my heart says that Forest will win 2-1. So when Elanga scored and puts 2-1 up, my heart was skipping a beat. And then my head said it'll be 2-2. But after 2-2, and then when Forest made the subs about 7 or 8 minutes later, it just became a little bit disjointed. Now, I'm just going to say it. There are a few people, obviously, especially after Luton, criticising Cooper for the subs, and Coops came out and owned it. He said, I got that wrong, and we got that wrong. This time, his hand was forced a little bit because Aurier was coming on for Aina, who clearly wasn't able to compete 90 minutes. Wood was coming on for Taiwo, who I reckon had played probably 10 minutes longer than they would have planned.
Yeah.
And then Murillo had gone down again and couldn't continue, which meant that we were replacing half of the back four in one go. That's never good for stability, is it, George?
No. And you say that the subs made a difference. I think actually as soon as we considered that goal, the mindset changed. I think it completely knocked the stuffing out of us. And we've been playing quite a high line for Forest throughout the whole of the game. And I was quite impressed by it because I thought, maybe they've taken some heart after watching Villa against them. It wasn't that high, but it was a lot higher than what we've seen. And they weren't dropping off like they have for pretty much every single away performance. They were looking quite good. But it's like the heads dropped. They slipped back into the old habits of dropping back. And I think, the changes were forced and Cooper probably had to make all three of them. But in a way, bringing Aurier on, who's probably more attacking than Aina, was probably a nod from Cooper to try and get Forest further up the pitch, back to playing how they'd got themselves into the game, because they deserved to take something out of the game. Until that point, they'd looked very equal to West Ham, and I don't think that Forest helped themselves at all. The way after the goal, they just completely sat back, allowed West Ham to have a lot of the possession, and didn't from then on try to play with any sort of venom. From there, it was sort of, let's try and hold on for the point. And in the end, it didn't end well. But I think Forest have got themselves to blame. There's been quite a lot of spouting of individuals on social media and in group chats and stuff, which, yeah, there is individual errors in there. But I think it was a lot more of a collective thing of Forest just sat back after that and invited West Ham onto them. And yes, the free kicks, you can blame who gave the free kicks away, who gave the corners away. But I think it was a general mindset that Forest had of, let's sit back, let's try and hold on to this, that in the end presented the opportunities for the free kicks to be given away, because that's always going to happen when you've got, players like Paquetá, Bowen slipping away from your men. So I think it was entirely self-inflicted, and the goal just swung the game into West Ham's favour entirely.
Yeah, and I mean, it's worth pointing out, actually, but before I know, you talked about individual errors, and I say it's not what we like to do on this podcast to call out players. But before Ino went off, he did commit probably the biggest individual error, because he did a soft back header back, and Souček got his foot to it, and it hit the bar, and Odysseus was able to claim it. It was a bit of a hairy moment, that, and then I say shortly afterwards the subs came on, and I agree. I kind of agree. The heads had gone down, and there was only really one team who were going to win it, although there were the odd moment where Forest looked like they wanted to do something. Danilo had come on at halftime for Dominguez, and in my opinion, I think Dominguez had never quite recovered from that moment 2 minutes in when he'd given the goal away. But even with that kind of, you'd hope, that extra attacking impetus, there was never really any kind of, I'd mentioned about Soufal getting the yellow card, and Kudus, who's playing on the right wing for West Ham, he'd also had a yellow card. So you'd have thought that with Toffolo and Elanga going down that left-hand side, you thought they'd really try and exploit that. And they never quite did, to be perfectly honest. And just to skip to the end, okay, so the thing that we all know happened is that Forest conceded another corner. And as we'll hear in a few minutes, Cooper thought that was an unnecessary concession as well. And so we conceded a corner. It was from the other side. Ward-Prowse took it. Souček had already had a chance from a corner, which had been flicked over by Odysseus. And this time, Souček made no mistake. Now, I said about Paquetá having the best shot, and we gave him a free shot. Ward-Prowse being the best set-piece taker, and we gave him the chance to take lots of set-pieces. Bowen being the best goal scorer, we gave him a header in the box. Souček is the tallest man on the entire pitch and is the best header of a ball on the pitch. And we gave him a free header, essentially. So another case of we've only got ourselves to blame, eh, George?
Yeah, and like you say, Forest had been warned multiple times about Souček's threat. I mean, you can't miss him. You cannot miss him. And you've got to have your tallest player marking him. Yeah, Forest's tallest player at that point was probably Bolly, and they're probably quite similar. But he finds it brilliantly. It's an excellent header into the corner. It's powerful. You can't fault the keeper for it. But it was coming. It was coming because Forest, and I know I've kept saying it, and I'll keep saying it until I go to bed tonight. Forest kept giving away those free kicks. They kept being naive and not clearing it, not getting high up the pitch. And in the end, I don't think that corner was even, I mean, it was an excellent corner from Ward-Prowse, but I don't think that was even one of his best. It was just into an area where, Souček got up ahead of anyone in red. It was sort of back post. It had gone over everyone. And he headed it in, and there's 2 minutes to play plus stoppage time after that. You knew Forest would have to come forward, but you just hoped if they'd have started coming forward and playing more positively until that point, they wouldn't have been in that position. So it's entirely self-inflicted, and it's just frustrating that we've came away from home, we've put a decent account of ourselves, we've scored 2 really good goals in the end. We've had another few chances with Taiwo, the header, and the shot that he had that he dragged wide. So and I think Arioli made the best save of the game, by the way. Odysseus was all right. And after the goal Forest conceded the second goal, you saw him came off his line a lot quicker from the corners, didn't he? And that maybe he felt he had a part to play in that goal being conceded. So, it's just
maybe. But as you said, I mean, that whole idea about Forest kind of almost leaving it, sitting back for a little bit too long. Previously, there's been an accusation that's been tactical. But it's also not the first time we've said that about
No.
Forest away from home this season. So even with the 7 or 8 minutes of stoppage time, and you pointed out, Ward-Prowse put it in the danger zone. We did have a few opportunities to throw set pieces in there in the stoppage time. And as you mentioned earlier, didn't really have any effectiveness with that. So the game did end 3-2 to West Ham. And obviously, if you win a game late on, you're absolutely high as a kite. If you lose it late on, then you feel sick as a parrot. And in a few minutes, we will hear from a West Ham fan. We'll also dissect the thoughts of Stevie Cooper.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
That cold case you're listening to? Nasty stuff. But you know what else is a crime? Missing even a moment of whatever you're doing to go on a drink run. Luckily, there's Drizzly, the #1 app for alcohol delivery. With Drizzly, you can compare prices on the biggest selection of beer, wine, and spirits, then get them delivered in under 60 minutes. So download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com today.
For the 23-24 season, 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast is sponsored by Greene King Sports, where football is more than a game. The Greene King Sports venues are shown every televised Forest fixture over the course of the season, including over the last couple of weeks. So instead of turning to the internet for a dodgy stream, get your mates together and get down to your local Greene King pub and get closer to the action after the international break. They've just launched their Instagram page, which will be home to fan content, deals and competitions, and you may have seen our very own George on there a few weeks ago. They've already given away tickets to the Champions League final and signed shirts, so make sure you don't miss out. Drop them a follow on Instagram, on Greene King Sports, and you won't just be the first to know about all of this, you'll be supporting us here at 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. Now, it's back to your match report.
The 1865 match report.
Will Pugh here from the We Are West Ham podcast, just walking out of the London Stadium at the moment after West Ham's 3-2 win against your team, Nottingham Forest. All in all, quite honestly, I thought we deserved it. I thought you played quite well, but West Ham, I think, in the first half, scored the goal, and as we do so often, sat back on our haunches a little bit and just let it all go a little bit relaxed and lackadaisical. But second half, it's annoying, but it took Nottingham Forest scoring the second to really kick our team into action and show the quality of players we've got and the type of football that we can actually play. I think the winner was fairly deserved, and I think it was coming. I understand Forest fans are probably a little bit aggrieved. Always disappointing to get a lead, particularly in the second half, and let it slip. But yeah, all in all, quite pleased. A much needed win for West Ham. Thought the atmosphere was quite good at the ground. And yeah, it just takes a little bit of pressure off David Moyes and caps off an excellent week. 2 wins in 2 after our Europa League triumph against Olympiacos on Thursday. But yeah, disappointment I'm sure for Forest, but solidifies West Ham's spot in 9th in the table, which is sort of where hopefully we should be targeting this season. But yeah, thoroughly enjoyed the game. Decent showing from the Forest fans. Was impressed with the quality of singing and songs and atmosphere from the away end. So kudos on that. But yeah, a well-deserved win for West Ham, 3-2 onwards and upwards.
Okay, thanks, Will. Now, George, you were just shaking your head about the atmosphere from the West Ham fans. We'll come to you to talk about that in a little while. What I will point out is that James from We Are West Ham gave us a little audio snippet last year after we beat West Ham in our first home match back in the Premier League. And of course, if he wants to hear an atmosphere, then that was a good day for atmosphere, wasn't it? So. But just very quickly, one of the things that Will did mention was about how both teams had this tendency to kind of sit back a little bit. So even when West Ham were in the ascendancy in the second half, it wasn't like they were electric in attack, was it? It was probably a bit self-inflicted, as you'd mentioned.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, both teams were definitely trying to play on the counter-attack. I think that was ultimately both teams' strength. And Forest have tried to play this new build-up possession football, but in the end they'd look far better when Vlachodimos tried to find Elanga, and a few times we had that opportunity. So Forest did look a lot better on the break. I think West Ham certainly did as well. They probably looked better on the counter in the first half. We looked better in the second half. So both teams I think were sort of scared of the other side on the break, and in the end that led to Forest just sitting back and conceding what in the end was the winner, and completely got themselves to blame for it.
And you know what? You're not the only person saying that, because Steve Cooper was he's always honest in his post-match interviews, but he sounded quite angry today. Let's hear from him.
We haven't won it, and we've lost the game on our own actions, and when you think about that, you can't look past the goals, which is an obvious thing to say, but we've gifted them a first goal right at the start of the game through a lack of concentration. And then the second goal, we obviously do brilliant to go 2-1 up, and we concede a corner within 3 or 4 seconds of kick-off through not winning duels and concentration. We let people go and they equalise. And then the third goal, we have a throw-in the middle of the pitch, more or less, and 3 or 4 seconds later, it's another corner we have to defend, and again, people not marking who they should, and he gets a free header in the goal. So yeah, for all of the things that went on in the game, and with it being a roller coaster, whatever it may be described at, for me personally, we can't look past our poor moments around the goals.
So he's not mincing his words there, is he, George? He's obviously not happy, and it's quite rare to hear him express it in such strong terms, isn't it?
And I think he's well within his right, because he set Forest up in what was the right way. I mean, some fans may say that they'd prefer Forest to be a bit more threatening on the break and play with a bit more confidence and pace. But in the end, until 60 minutes, Forest were equally as good as West Ham. And that's not something you can have said from Forest away from home for the entirety of last season and for a lot of the games this season. So Forest came into the game, it was a very even game. I think we were 15th, they were 13th. So it's clearly two sides that are very equal. And Cooper set Forest up in the perfect way. And it was just, players maybe losing their heads. There was a few times, like I say, like Cooper said, from throw-ins where we just threw it straight to them. I remember random bits of the game, but I remember Aina he took about 5 seconds on a throw-in. We had Awoniyi free in the middle, and we had a pass back, but he played it in the middle straight to, I think it was Ward-Prowse, who turned, and West Ham had possession. So it was just Forest not sticking to the plan that was working so well up until the point that they decided to not stick to it. And obviously it's probably not a conscious decision. It's the confidence that they lost after getting that relief, that joy of going in ahead, and then immediately being pegged back off their own back. So it's not obviously a conscious thing the players have done, but had the players have stuck to the plan, I'm sure Forest would have got something out of that game, and maybe even would have been able to threaten and score again, as opposed to sit back and concede numerous chances.
Yeah, and that idea about sticking to the plan, that's something that we'll be talking about again during the international break when we record our Forest Ramble discussion podcast. What I will just say is that we've had a few tweets from listeners. So Joel said that they were at the game. It was better than the previous fixture, which is
not difficult.
But it's that whole thing about both taking and defending set pieces, and as you mentioned earlier as well, Joel refers to that idea about Gibbs White, he's having to play out of position at the moment for the sake of the team, and I don't think anyone's really questioning his kind of work rate and his application, but it's just that we're not getting the best out of him. And Joel also said, but Cooper clearly knows this. And we're looking like a mid-table side, which is a topic of conversation that we've had before on this very podcast. Sid also came in and said that, we're looking better than a year ago in almost every way. So now it's about adding that level of savviness. So it's coming back to that idea that we've talked about before, about Forest looking more like a mid-table team. I remember you saying it after the point away at Palace. It looked like a match between two mid-table teams. And that was very true of today's match, I thought. And as you said, Forest separated by just a point and 1 or 2 places in the table before today, which makes it feel a little bit more disappointing that lack of desire or belief, and as you and Cooper have both called it, kind of crept in a little bit, and we don't want the away form to go like it did last season, do we?
Yeah, and I'm very glad that is the mood with Forest fans, because you saw after the Luton game it was just volatile, and it was get Cooper out, get the players out, everyone's atrocious. And today Forest lost the game off their own back, much like they did against Luton. So I'm glad this sense of I think that Villa win has done it. Forest have not beaten Villa and came through this spell still without a win, still on the longest streak without a win. it's amazing what wins can do, and it brings so much confidence to the side. And no one's forgot that win. People are still thinking about the Villa game and the fact that we deserve to beat one of the best teams in the league. So that's bought, I suppose, Forest a bit of time in the fans' minds. But I'm glad that this realistic, positive approach is here because, Forest are we 7 points above the relegation zone? This time last season, we were about 7 points adrift of 17th.
So we're on 13 points in 15th position, and this time last season I think we're on 5 points. Luton are just below the line on 6 points. So yes, a 7 point cushion. Just to sort of skip ahead a little bit. So it obviously is the international break coming up, and after that we've got Brighton, Everton, Fulham away, Wolves away, and then Tottenham at home. And then the last match before Christmas will be Bournemouth at home. So there's some tough fixtures coming up, but I guess that's stating the obvious. In the Premier League, it is tough. What we want to do, I suppose, is keep the mid-table mentality, because what the club need to be doing is showing signs of progress. And in fairness, for all the questions about how demanding the owner is, in all seasons but one, Forest have progressed since the current ownership has taken over. So you'd hope that would continue. And there are all signs that despite a few hiccups in the road, and the Liverpool match was a really stark reminder that we're not there yet.
Forest are.
That Forest can hold their own a little bit. Just to finish off as well, before we sign off, just Mr. Marinakis, he must really hate West Ham at the moment, yeah?
Yeah, 2 losses. Cooper was there, wasn't he? I think he said against for the Olympiacos game. So, I mean, they beat him at their place, didn't they, Olympiacos? So it's not too sour, but yeah, I'm sure he's not pleased. But what I would say is about the previous point that Forest, we can't forget who we've played in this run. We've been to some of the hardest places in the Premier League, and we're still much better than we were last season. Last season, we were struggling to beat Leicester, who went down, and things like that. So we can't forget who we've played. And you mentioned that run of fixtures. I know you said there's no easy game in the Premier League, but some of those teams, I think Forest should be aiming to get points off. And if they can take the confidence from the Villa game, take the confidence from scoring a couple of goals in this match, and I think it'll probably do Forest good to some players will go away for the international break, get this out of their minds, come back with the positivity from the last game and really knuckle down, because that's the fixtures. This is where the season starts, really, isn't it? After this break, they've got that run of fixtures. They're playing Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday, and they've got to be aiming for, I think, 10 points before Christmas at a minimum.
Okay, thank you very much to George. Thank you also to Will from the We Are West Ham podcast. And thank you to the 1865 podcast. My name's been Rich Ferraro. We'll be back during the international break with one of our Forest Ramble discussion podcasts. Keep an eye on our social media, because we'll be putting out a couple of polls and asking you to get involved. But most of all, thank you, listener, for joining us today, and take care of yourselves in the meantime.
Podcast Network.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.